Hello and welcome to Creator Weekly for January 11th, 2026. I'm Peggy Kay, and this week I'm going to be talking about the top trends of 2025 that I see moving into the current year. We'll probably see more of this. There aren't actually a lot of real updates this week because I assume companies are still coming back up to speed after the holidays. But next week there'll be regular updates. So I'm going to look at the whole creator ecosystem, some trends that affect YouTube, TikTok, social sites like Instagram, and so forth. So, to get all of this week's details and links, be sure to check out this week's newsletter. You can subscribe to that for free in your email inbox every Saturday. And there's a link to this week's edition where you can get all the links. I do want to mention one update. If you received a password reset email from Instagram in the past day or so that you did not initiate, you can ignore that. Just a few hours ago, Instagram announced we fixed an issue that let an external party request password reset emails for some people. There was no breach of our systems, and your Instagram accounts are secure. You can ignore those emails. Sorry for any confusion. There's been a lot of people talking that this must be a big data breach and so forth. Instagram says there was not, but somehow someone got into their systems and sent these password reset emails. So it's good to check your Instagram security settings and to set up two-step verification. Make sure your account is secure, and never hurts to do that. So to get started this week, 1 year ago this week, we were talking about TikTok being banned in the US. Now, if you've been around at all, you know that didn't happen. So, TikTok is supposedly a national security risk. It's owned by a Chinese company, and that's affecting the algorithms and whatnot. It was supposed to be transferred to US ownership with a deadline of January 19th, 2025. And actually, on January 19th, ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, shut down TikTok, CapCut, and its other apps in the United States. But that only lasted like 24 hours. One of the first things that President Trump did when he got back into office was an executive order saying the law would not be enforced for 75 days. All that they needed to do was, make a deal, transfer TikTok to a US company, get approval from the Chinese government. Easy, right? So that extension expired in April. There was a new extension that expired in June. There was a new extension that expired in September, and another extension that expired in December. And just around the time that it expired in December, there was a big announcement. They set up a company, big time investors in the US. ByteDance would be a partial owner still. Sounds like a done deal that would be finalized by January 22nd, just in a couple weeks from now. And here's how it's going. Around Christmas, the Chinese government issued a statement that says that it hopes that relevant parties can reach a solution regarding TikTok that complies with Chinese laws and regulations and achieves a balance of interests, which certainly doesn't sound like this is a done deal yet. So we shall wait and see what happens in the next few weeks. If there's not a done deal, there'll probably be another extension. Nobody's actually worried about it being a national security threat at this point. It's ridiculous. So this was actually important, though, because this potential shutdown of TikTok in the US really pushed other platforms to get their video feeds going. And sort of set themselves up as being competitors to TikTok. That's Blue Sky and X, LinkedIn, even Tumblr. And you had Twitch and YouTube saying, oh, we welcome all the TikTok creators to our platform, made it easy for them to shift over if they wanted to. And Meta went all in and said, well, we're making a CapCut, that's the video editing app. We're making a CapCut alternative. So all of this really slightly changed the dynamics across social sites on the web. Hopefully, TikTok creators use this opportunity to not make sure not all their eggs were in the TikTok basket. So kind of diversify their platforms at least. I don't know if people did or not, but this is still pending. This is still up in the air. I'll probably be talking about this in next year's recap as well. So one of the things I mentioned is CapCut alternative. And really, if you look back over the course of 2025, there were a whole bunch of new video creation and editing apps that were launched. These are free to use, but there's a catch. There's always a catch. These were actually shared to sort of be showcases of the generative AI tools being created by all these companies. So you can use these platforms, these apps, but they're kind of limited if you don't pay, if you want to use the AI features. So if you don't pay, it might be slower. You may have less clips you can generate, that sort of thing. But if you don't care about those generative AI features, this is actually a huge boon. I'll mention again, there are links to all these platforms in this week's newsletter. So I'll just break it down into sort of categories. There are platforms that are designed specifically to just be for generative AI creation. There's Google Flow. This is positioned as an AI filmmaking tool with advanced features. It's supposed to be for serious movie creators. And then OpenAI has the Sora app. That is a social app. I think it's just for iOS. So it has OpenAI's latest video model, Sora, and you can turn yourself into a character. It's supposed to be kind of social that way. And Meta launched Vibes. That's a feed of AI videos in the Meta AI app and website. Again, you can turn people into videos, and of course, since it's Meta, it's easy to post your creations on Instagram and Facebook Reels. So, oh, and I'll mention there's also a Bing video creator. It also uses OpenAI's Sora video model. I don't know why you would want to use that when you have these other options, but it's out there. And then beyond that, though, there are a bunch of video editing tools that are actually more like you can create a video from your own video clips and voiceovers and things like that. There's a timeline where you can edit. This includes Google Vids. This is integrated with Google Workspace, and it was Google Workspace only for a while, but now free personal accounts can use it. But again, most of the AI tools require a paid subscription. There's the Adobe Firefly video editor. Firefly's their video generation model. So of course, there's lots of generative AI features. Again, those are slightly limited if you're not paying for a subscription or buying credits to use Firefly, but it lets you use your own video clips, and it has a timeline editor and so forth. Adobe Express is a design platform that lets you create videos, and the very similar Canva, they also revamped their video editor. You can use these in your browser. You can create your own videos. And again, they have generative AI features. You don't have to use them. And, you know, that's where they're trying to get money. So it's free. You can try these all for free. You do have to have accounts, though. You have to have a Google account for Google Vids, an Adobe account for Adobe Express, a Canva account to use Canva, but you can use it for free. And then there's a bunch of mobile apps, and these tend to actually be the most powerful video editing tools. There's Instagram Edits, which is explicitly a CapCut competitor. Meta announced it literally on January 19th when CapCut was being shut down, and it's gotten tons of updates over the past year. Free to use, no watermark. It has Instagram integrations. You don't need to use them. There's YouTube Create, which was sort of neglected for a long while, but it got a bunch of updates this year. Templates, AI tools, and it expanded to more countries and to iOS devices. And then there's Adobe Premiere. Adobe Premiere is Adobe's professional video editing platform. They have a mobile app, though, that's totally free, only available for iOS right now. There's you can sign up if you're interested in the Android version to hear about when it's available. Google Photos, they redesigned their video editor. Again, there's generative AI features, but you can use it to edit your videos into a little movie without using the AI tools if you don't want. And of course, all the platforms have their built-in video editors as well. There's the YouTube Shorts editor, the Instagram Camera, TikTok Studio. All of those got updates in the 2025. They really want people to be creating videos and trying those generative AI tools and paying for those. So that's where we are now. I think this is a great boon for creators. And I'll note, though, that there's no such thing as a free lunch. This is a business decision. These platforms are not your friend. They're not doing anything really to benefit you beyond their own business. Over the past year, Facebook announced they would be deleting live stream archives after 30 days because people aren't really watching them after that. Then they shut down their gaming creator program, again, probably because people weren't really using it that much. Twitch started limiting storage of highlights and uploads to the platform. And, don't count on these platforms to be there forever, free to store things or anything. Make sure you have your own copies. And, again, these are business decisions. They are not your friend. Interestingly, YouTube does not have any limitations on how many videos you can upload, how long you can store things. They're even using AI to upscale lower resolution videos. They look better on things like TVs. That's a totally different business model, but I think YouTube's a lot better at getting advertising revenue from videos than these other platforms. So I want to take a moment just to say hello to all you folks in the live chat. Hi, Andrew and Craig and Jalen. It's great to see you here. I hope you had a great week. I'd love to hear what you think about all these updates and changes and whether you've actually tried any of these new tools that are being launched. So, there's all these new AI features. That's something every week, new AI features, but there's been a lot of pushback against generative AI, and there's this tension between creators, viewers, and the companies that are making these AI tools. I'll say this is Google Trends for the past year or so, and it's pretty clear that people, not all people necessarily, but many people are feeling like social media, YouTube, and so forth are being overrun with AI slop. You can see the trend there. AI slop as a topic really got started in 2024. It's still going up. The red line there is the topic of a clanker. That's, kind of a disparaging term about droids in the Star Wars universe and people using it for like AI bots. It's a clanker. I'm not sure it really caught on because it peaked and then is dropping off. But both of these terms are showing the unease people have about AI content. A lot of it is really low quality, spammy. It's so easy to create, it's just flooding things. And then creators have to balance their use of AI tools. So there's a lot of generative AI tools that are useful, but don't actually create content from scratch. Things like improving the way a video sounds or looks and so forth. So, but there's a lot of insults and people say, oh, this must be AI. And there's a perception that if you're using AI to create your blog post or your videos or your photos, you don't care. There's a lack of authenticity. And then, of course, creators have this burden because, you know, their content is being used without permission to train these AI models that are then being used to churn out this AI slop. So interestingly, you know, platforms aren't that great at detecting AI-generated images and videos, or, you know, I don't know if it's that they're not trying that hard or if it's really, really difficult. You know, there are watermarks. If you use Google Gemini or other Google tools, there's a watermark. If you use Adobe's AI tools, there's a watermark, and those can be detected. I don't know why they aren't always labeled. And most platforms do require creators to indicate if realistic looking content was synthetic, created with AI, but people don't always do that. And even when they do that, the platforms don't really label these things very boldly. It's like YouTube, you have to go look in the description, which who's going to do that, right? So one of the things some platforms are doing is asking people, how much AI content do you want to see? These are the settings from Pinterest. You can indicate the various types of content where you want to see more AI. I don't want to see AI for any of these. TikTok also has similar settings. They don't say they won't show you anything generated with AI. They just say that they will show you less. But it is interesting that that is an option at all. And there were also a bunch of initiatives launched to supposedly allow creators and publishers to choose whether their content could be used for training these AI models. It's not clear any of these work. A lot of these AI scraper bots, they ignore anything that says, don't go there. They just scrape everything, even to the point of causing a denial of service attack, essentially, on websites. And this is not just rogue small companies. I've heard that Meta's bot, for example, is very aggressive at scraping through things to the point, again, of causing performance issues on these websites. So it's not only taking all this content for training, so it can create new content, but also hurting the original sites as well. But there are a bunch of these initiatives launched in 2025. It's not clear any of them will work, but I think it's interesting that this is where it's going. There's Adobe's content credentials that lets you add attribution to the metadata of your digital works. You can use it to indicate if you allow generative AI training. YouTube has a setting that lets you opt your videos into third-party training of third-party AI. You can pick, you know, oh, I only want Adobe AI to be able to use this. Notably, though, this is only for third parties. You can't opt out of Google using your YouTube content for training their AI tools. There is the RSL Collective. This is more professional. It offers a license for publishers to use on their site to try and collect royalties from AI companies. training with that content. There's Creative Commons signals. This is, Creative Commons is a license that you can add to your content that says how it can be used. You can say people can use it, personally, commercially, so forth. And so this is a different scheme you can use to say, oh, you can use this for, AI training. And they are working with the RSL Collective, supposedly. And then there's Cloudflare. You can set this to pay per crawl. Cloudflare can set up a block. So none of these bots can actually scrape your content, which is a good thing. I know there's a bunch of sites that use Cloudflare just to prevent this. Not even if being anti-AI, they're just anti, denial of service. And the idea is that this requires these bots to agree to pay a licensing fee. Again, I doubt they're going to do this. Andrew says, I like Cloudflare's pay per crawl. Yeah, that's kind of, I like the idea of it. I would love to hear if this has any chance of working ever. And I'm thinking no, because these AI companies are like, go ahead, do things until they're forced not to. And they're, complaining, well, if we had to pay for licenses, it would be too expensive. Too bad. But, they're trying to go ahead without any licensing. And then they make these tools saying, oh, you don't need any skill. And, we don't need to hire anyone creative. You can just make this total imitation of someone's work. And they do this, There's a lot of talk, for example, with Sora, people generating video clips that look exactly like the content that Sora was trained on. They do have guardrails, but it's easy to get around them. So the AI companies don't care. More companies that are not your friend. And then to add insult to injury, we saw a huge drop on people clicking links in the Google search results. So Google search, they expanded access to AI overviews in the search results, and they launched what they call AI mode. This runs multiple related searches simultaneously, then compiles them back into one response. And of course, people see that and they say, oh, I got my answer, and they don't actually need to click the links. This is a problem, of course, because, if someone has a website, they want the website to be used, not to have Google scrape all that information to feed it to people. And there's sort of this social contract between publishers and Google. It's like, well, Google can go in and index all this content with the idea that then it shows up in search and that brings traffic to the site. This kind of breaks that contract. So what we see, they're calling the alligator graph. I think there's a bunch of sites talking about this, where impressions in Google search are going up and clicks are going down, sort of like alligator jaws. And I can say that I totally see this for my own site. On mine, the impressions are basically staying about the same, and the clicks dropped off in early April. Yes, right around the time that AI mode launched, which honestly, it sucks, right? So I'm doing the work, I put out the information, and Google scrapes it up and feeds it to people without giving me any benefit at all. So Google knows that publishers, bloggers are not happy about this. And so they are trying to make it nicer for people to actually visit sites. So they say, first of all, Google's like, well, we're not sending as much traffic, but the traffic's higher quality with, small comfort if it's almost none at all. And then they recently started to highlight links better in the search results, adding a link description, making links more visible, that sort of thing. Again, we'll see what happens, but this is going to, I think, push people away from free blogging and newsletters and news sites and publishing because they can't afford to do it if they're not getting any visitors. And I'll just mention briefly that owning your audience, this was a big thing in 2024. 2025, though, what we're seeing is these platforms, I'm showing Substack, Patreon, they're adding all these features to their platforms where theoretically you have people's email addresses or so forth, but they add live streaming, newsletters, notes, almost like a Twitter-like feed, and they're adding algorithmic feeds where people go to the sites, you go to Substack, you go to Patreon, and you get this whole feed of posts. Again, locking creators into those platforms, you're not really owning your audience. And while in 2024, we talked a lot about federation, social sites talking to each other, that seems to have died off a little, at least that conversation. Not that it isn't happening, but that it's less of a big deal, including Meta's Threads. It has federation, but they're not talking about it. So the other thing that was really notable about 2025 were changes in policy, especially around hateful content, hate speech, and misinformation. Of course, the big driver of this was the political climate in the US. This is no surprise. Companies respond to that. Again, they don't really have, they talk about having various principles, but really it's all about business. But Meta made a big deal in January of 2025. They were changing their policy. They really wanted more free expression. That meant updating their hateful content policy to allow more insulting and hateful content around homosexuality, transgender rights, and immigration. And they got rid of their biased fact checkers because saying something is not factual is apparently biased. They replaced them with community notes. This is where users can add a note to something. The trick there, though, is with community notes, only notes that people from across the political spectrum with all different points of view, they have to agree that it's a good note, which in practice means that most notes never actually display, especially if they touch on political issues. And if you're following US politics, everything is political now. So I feel like switching to notes from fact checking is really basically to say that the platforms don't want to touch anything that people who intentionally spread misinformation do. They say, oh, it's out of our hands. And I'll say that TikTok also launched notes. They call them footnotes, same idea. YouTube has been testing those for a couple of years now. All these platforms have notes, and I never see them. I don't think they work except to say, oh, we're letting people give additional context. Sure. And I'll mention that it's not just Meta that changed their hate speech policies. They made a big deal about it, but you'll note that YouTube removed gender identity from their protected group attributes in their hate speech policy. They do say it includes sex, gender, and sexual orientation. And YouTube says, oh, we haven't really changed policy. We just changed the wording a little bit, but it's very specific wording that they changed. Again, LinkedIn removed misgendering or dead naming of transgender individuals as an example of prohibited content, and removed race or gender identity as examples of inherent traits where it's considered negative comments are harassment. Again, they said, oh, this isn't really a policy change. We still have harassment policy and so forth. We just changed the wording. And so maybe this was just to make certain people feel better, and their enforcement hasn't changed, but I'm not buying that. I don't see this improving in the next year. And I'll say that there are also a couple trends that I think are really going to be clear in 2026. The first is what I call choose your own adventure. People don't trust AI, they don't trust algorithms, they don't trust big companies. Platforms know this, and they still want people to be there, so they're giving people more choices. We're seeing that, for example, you can adjust the topics you want to see in your Instagram Reels feed, customize frequency of popular topics in TikTok, in the For You feed. Plus, YouTube is testing your custom feed on the home screen. These are all similar ideas where you have some controls over the topics you see. They're all experimental at this point, except for the Instagram Reels. We shall see how that plays out in 2026. You can add preferred sources to Google search for the top stories shelf. Again, that lets you control the sources of information that you're seeing. And there is a shift to private sharing. And you see on Instagram and TikTok, there are these collaborative feeds where you would have direct messaging with your friends, and then you have a feed together of recommended content. So you can see what your friends are seeing and get recommendations that way. So it, shifts the recommendations to what your friend group is doing. YouTube is also testing this out. They just started testing. So we're going to see more of this in 2026 as well. And then, of course, the watchword for 2026 is going to be authenticity. How this plays out is unclear. You may see less polished looking content and more people on camera. Platforms maybe will try to do a better job identifying artificial content, and we're going to see more identity verification. On X, there isn't real identity verification, but they started showing what country accounts are in, so that gives you some context about that. LinkedIn has free identity verification. Reddit is testing identity verification. And we're getting, of course, a lot of age verification to comply with various laws, Australia and UK, various states in the US. And some of this, again, is going to mean that you're less likely to see someone pretending to be an adult. So authenticity, verification, those are what's happening in 2026. So those are the creator trends. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Craig says, oh, Andrew says, I love private sharing, smaller groups, but better conversations. Definitely true. And Craig says, when the internet was slow, you could only blog. That's true. So now we have more of an expansion, people on video. You're almost expected to be on video in addition to blogging and text. So we'll see more of that as well. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you all next Sunday.